Shall we start?
So we can give it another minute and allow
Sure.
a little more people to join, if
Sure.
that's okay. Yes, Dr. Vasudevan, I think you can go ahead.
Yeah. Right. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. On behalf of the Indian Academy of Neurology and the Contemplative Neurology Subsection, I welcome all those present, office bearers of the Academy, members of the Academy, members of the subsection. Today's program is an important one as it also is an outreach. People outside the Indian Academy of Neurology, in particular medical professionals other than neurologists, members of the scientific community, including guests from the IIT, the field of information technology, the Beyond Brain Forum, and guests from the PM community, of course, and all those interested in today's topic. In the current age of explosive growth of artificial intelligence, today's topic is not only profound but very timely and relevant. And equally up to the challenge is the speaker of the day, Dr. Tony Nader, who will be formally introduced to you shortly. Till about 2 decades ago, the conventional understanding of consciousness was firmly established. That is, the activity of the neurons in the brain generates consciousness. And to talk about any other possibility was taboo to the neuroscientific academia. Extensive research and a deeper understanding, along with the openness to at least examine and look at newer propositions, though a bit reluctantly, has led to a remarkable change in this situation. In the past 2 decades, serious research on consciousness in prestigious mainstream universities across the world have taken place. Many theories, like the global workspace theory or the integrated information theory, which are quite elegant, have been proposed to explain consciousness. However, the glaring lacune, or in many of them, or the deficiency in all of them, is the uniform inability to explain subjective first person experiences based on objective phenomena. I'm sure Dr. Tony Nader will, in his eloquent style, be able to clear the air on many of such issues and also give us tips on spiritual practices in which he is an adept. I shall not be wrong in saying that everyone is eagerly looking forward to this talk. I now request Professor Sudhir Shah, Chair of the subsection, to introduce and invite the speaker of the day, Dr. Tony Nader. Dr. Sudhir Shah, please.
Welcome all friends. Today we have a great fortune of having one of the most influential personality, a rare breed of a medical doctor as well as a spiritualist and a transcendental meditation teacher and Vedic science expert, all in one person, that is Dr. Tony Nader. He is a neuroscientist trained at Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the most renowned institutes of the world, and he is a renowned researcher in the field of consciousness and human development. And currently, he is a global head of TM organizations. He is a successor of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in that sense. He is a MD, PhD. He has conducted research in neurochemistry, neuroendocrinology, the relationship between age, diet, mood, behavior, seasonal influences, and main work is in the neurotransmitter and hormonal activity and on the role of neurotransmitter precursors in medicine. He's author of 5 books, out of which one Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness is one of the best sellers, and he is the successor to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, as I said, and the head of the Transcendental Meditation Organization globally. He has been awarded on many occasions the Humanitarian Award for his outstanding contribution in human development, environment, education, and health. He has discussed his expertise with various experts across the globe, including academic institutions such as Harvard Business School on the neuroscience of transcendence, Stanford University, where he gave talks in a series entitled Hacking Consciousness, as well as the keynote speaker for a number of conferences at House of Commons in British Parliament. Dr. Nader has successfully correlated each aspect of Vedic literature to a specific area of human physiology and anatomy, as well as the cell and DNA, with the conclusion that human physiology is the expression of Veda and Vedic literature. This is a very novel concept, and I was fortunate enough to hear him firsthand, sitting at a distance of maybe 10 feet when he came to my city, Ahmedabad, several years back. This is a subject matter of five of his published books. He also published a book on Ramayana in human physiology. That subject I heard at length, which extended this profound scientific elaboration of scientific significance of Veda. So, ladies and gentlemen, I propose now Dr. Tony Nader to enlighten us and tell us how consciousness is pervading everywhere and how it helps us understand the exact energy, fields, matter, material, and all these things, how it is one and uniform. I'm sure he has come up with a fantastic theory, and we'll all relish that. Dr. Nader, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Thank you, Dr. Devanandan. It's a joy and an honor to be with this auspicious and grand assembly of thinkers, scientists, and philosophers of the field of life. And it's really a joy for me because with this forum, this assembly, it's possible to really go deep into both scientific and philosophical constructs and concepts that help us to understand the most profound aspects of life, some of the most profound aspects of existence that seekers of knowledge have throughout the ages wanting to understand. There is nowhere in the world where seekers of truth are as many as in India, and that is not just because of the sheer population of India, but this has been all through history, seeking to understand life, seeking to understand the meaning of life and knowledge, and what is the purpose of our presence here, what is ultimate reality, where do we come from, where do we go, what is the purpose of action, what is good, what is bad, why we have evil, do we have freedom? And all of these questions that have been posed throughout history and has been researched and explained by sages, by rishis, by prophets, by different perspectives, and more recently, which means in the past 300 years, by scientists also. So science has taken the approach that philosophy and spirituality and thinking about things from a theoretical perspective is not leading necessarily to always reliable knowledge, because it's based on opinion and sometimes on logic and reasoning. But sometimes reasoning and logic also falls into some type of fallacies that can happen, because correlations is not always meaning action and reaction as cause and effect. And so to make a long story short, science went into the investigation of the objective universe, which means the objects. What are the objects made of? Whereas the ancient knowledge of consciousness and the rishis and the investigations from, we can say, the eastern part of the world generally, but in particular from India, from Bharat, has been into looking inward, looking into one's own awareness, one's own consciousness. So we have these different approaches. One is introspective, which means trying to see what can I experience. So direct experience by introspection. One is intellectual, which means studying things from a rational perspective, from a logical perspective. That is mostly philosophy. And then there is the objective approach, which is try to see what actually things are made of. What is the construct that makes this universe? And having looked at all these perspectives from an intellectual analysis, which is more mathematics and philosophy, formalized philosophy is actually mathematics in a sense. And then from the experience level, which is direct experience through meditation, through transcending, through directly going deep into oneself, and this having also an effect on psychology, how the mind feels, how the mind works, the effect of that on feelings, on behavior, cognition, emotion, affect, and all of that. And then also from the objective perspective, which means analyze and weigh things and see them, how they respond to each other. I have personally come to a conclusion, which I love to share with you today, particularly that this conclusion has been actually reached from all of these different perspectives. If we truly put them together and analyze them together, we find that there is a convergence that allows us to come to a certain conclusion. So to start, let's say, we start with the philosophical paradigm, because we have to start somewhere, about the nature of reality. What is reality? What are we made of? Throughout history, in terms of, particularly, I will start with the objective perspective, which means that perspective that analyzes material, physical reality through means of weighing, detecting electrical things, detecting forces, and looking at the laws of nature. From the physical perspective, we can say that it goes back to, of course, also the East and India and all that, but in the Western world, to the Greeks and the Arabs and the different individuals who investigated physical reality in the Western or Middle Eastern and Western world, because they have been trying to see what are things made of. And so first we had the idea that, there are elements in nature, air, fire, water, and space, akasha, all the five Mahabhutas, which are very well defined in the Indian literature and in the Vedic literature, but which have also been acknowledged in modern understanding as the elements of fluidity, solidity, heat and change and exchange of heat, air, gaseous states, and then space, or akasha, and as we know in the Mahabhutas. So many of those thinkers were saying, okay, what is the original value? And some would say it is air, some would say it is water. It's just taking us through a little bit of a historical thing, but I'll cut it short because it's no point to look at history. But just to say that as science kept on advancing, there was a time in the Greeks where they said that ultimate reality must be made out of some particulate values that are indivisible. So idea was, if you take any object, a human being or a planet or a stone or a tree or anything, and start looking at what are the constituents of that individual entity, physical entity, and you keep dividing it into pieces. So you take, for example, any piece of wood or a piece of stone or whatever, and divide it into pieces, into smaller and smaller entities, you will reach a point where you cannot divide it anymore. And that is the indivisible elementary particle at that time, it was thought, and they called it atom. Atom in Greek means, as we know also from Sanskrit, negates something or is the fullness of something, but let's talk about it in terms. Atom means indivisible. So objects, therefore, are all made of atoms according to that perception. And for 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years, maybe almost 2,000 years, this has been thought to be the ultimate constituents of everything, atomic value, the atom, which is something physical. Now, when science took this further in the past 150 years, and actually started to look at the atoms, whatever those atoms are, as we see them in the chemical, structure of, hydrogen, helium, etc. They started to see that actually those atoms are made out of particles themselves, so the electron and the nucleus, and then as science was able to look deeper into those atoms, they found that there are more elementary particles than the atom. So there is the electron and there is the nucleus, but the nucleus is itself made out of not just neutrons and protons, but it's also made out of the protons and the neutrons are made out of more elementary particles, more profound particles, and those are quarks and other kinds, so they have them now very well described. And as there are more powerful ways of going deeper into matter, even those quarks and all that and elementary particles have been found to be fluctuations of fields. So these are fields of energy and fields of forces that are like electrical field, magnetic field, the gravitational field. And a field is like an ocean, if you like, that spreads around and it fluctuates. And its fluctuations, its activity has an oscillating kind of reality, which appears as, on the surface level, appears as particles, quarks. And the quarks come together and they form elementary particles, and the elementary particles, which are a little more expressed, they come together, they form atoms. Atoms come together, form molecules, and like that, molecules come together to form the objects and the cells and the whole universe. So indeed, they have found that there are these fields, and these fields are electrical field, magnetic field, weak forces, strong forces, and gravitational forces. And as they kept looking deeper into reality, they found that these fields are more and more unified. So that it's not that there is a field of electricity and another field of magnetism. It's the same field, which they call electromagnetic field, which we call electromagnetic field, And that electromagnetic field is one field that appears as electricity if you look at it from a linear perspective, a certain perspective. And if you have a rotational perspective, it appears as magnetic aspect. So the magnet and the electricity are actually the same field, but appearing as two different aspects. And a Nobel Prize was given for those who unified this electromagnetic field. And as they kept looking deeper into actually ultimate reality, it was more and more found that there is more and more unification. So there is the grand unification theory, which unifies the electromagnetic field with the field of what they call weak forces. We don't have to go into those details, what they are. It's not the purpose. It's just to say that the path of finding what is ultimate reality has taken us from diversity of all these possibilities and atoms and all kinds and molecules and cells and all that appears on the surface as different into more and more unified state of reality, which is fields, and now the fields themselves being unified. And there are theories today that unify all the fields. So there is the superstring theory, the M theory in physics that actually says that all these fields are unified in one field, which is called the unified field of all the laws of nature. So the unified field is perceived as one field that leads to appearances of different fields, and then the different fluctuations of those fields appear to be like molecules and atoms and like that, atoms, molecules, cells, and whatever organic and inorganic material that come together that appear as the universe. So from an objective perspective, we can say the ultimate objectivity being in search of what is matter made of, what is the universe made of, leads us to a unified state, which is a unified field of the laws of nature. Now, concurrently, many things were discovered that were mind-baffling on the level of these fields. What is mind-baffling is that what we call locality, for example, you take an object and you say it's a local object. It's, like a billiard ball or a stone or whatever, an object. And you say this is local, which means it is constrained and local in time and space. And therefore, everything is local in the classical universe, in what we see as the Newtonian classical universe, which means forces that interact on different objects that are localized in time and space. But when you go to that deep level of understanding objectivity from the objective level, those particles or those fluctuations of the fields appear to be non-local. They are non-local, which means, for example, on this very fine level, the electron, even the electron, is more like a cloud than a particle. And it has a probability of being practically almost anywhere, or with different probabilities. As you go away from a certain high probability, the probability becomes less and less and less, but it can still be possible. There is a probability that the electron that you observe locally is actually present in Mars or in different parts of the universe with a certain potentiality at a certain time. So that is called the non-locality aspect of quantum mechanics. Quantum is referring to these very fine, smaller levels of analysis, and where there is quanta, which means quantities of energy rather than objects as such. and there is therefore non-locality, which means things are spread out, and then how do they then get observed and seen in a specific place? What very specific experiments have shown, and that have shown in a repeated way, is that they get localized when you observe them. So if there is an observation, if you are observing them, these elementary particles appear as localized entities, which means you can see how they are. And there is a very complex, but also very, very simple experiment, which is called the double slit experiment, where you shine light through two slits, and then you see how it projects on a screen. And if it projects as particles, which means specific dots, then you say it's localized. And if it projects as waves, then you say it is a probability function. It is not localized. Again, we don't need to go into the physics of this. We have much more to discuss, and this is only one small part, really, of the whole discussion. So when you observe them, when there is an observer or something to try to observe them, these particles appear as localized. When you're not observing them and you let it be itself projected on the screen, they appear as waves. So this is how the wave aspect of matter emerged as reality, as well as the, for light, the photon, the particulate aspect of matter arises. So matter has these two qualities, wave and particle at the same time. And it's localized, can be localized when you observe it. So this is how the scientists came together, the top scientists of that, about 100 years ago, when they observed this phenomenon, and they came to a city in Europe, Copenhagen, and they discussed how can this be possible, and they came out with what is called the Copenhagen interpretation, which actually says that consciousness collapses the wave function. The wave function is the wave of probability of the atoms or the actual particles. The probability, we said it has probability to be here or to be there or to be somewhere else, to be somewhere completely different. This is a probability, but when you observe it, when consciousness is put on it, the observer, it collapses into a specific particulate way, and that is the Copenhagen interpretation. Today, this Copenhagen interpretation has been extended to include any interaction actually with the particle, which means the observer doesn't have to be a human being. It could be any other particle interacting with that particle, and it collapses it in a specific point or a specific reality, which is localizable in space and in time. These are important aspects, and I'm glad I can discuss them with such a great enlightened scientific audience, because they have implications on how we see reality. Now, another aspect that has been found that is very interesting in terms of the physical approach, the objective approach, when scientists look deeper and deeper also into the reality, they found that things are correlated at distances that are immediate, and therefore they violate, as if they violate, the speed of light restriction that Einstein has very much proven to be a reality, that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. But if you take one particle and split it into two particles, assuming it's a particle that can be split, then these particles have characteristics. And these characteristics are always correlated. So if one is spinning or turning in one direction, the other one will spin and turn in the other direction to maintain balance and equal value of spinning. Now, what is very unbelievably amazing for when it was discovered is that these particles can go and travel very long distances, and yet at the same time, when this particle changes its angle of rotation or direction of rotation, the other particle at the same time, exactly the same time, also changes its angle of rotation. This is called entanglement, which means they are connected deeply together. The particles are connected very deeply together. And that connection is beyond space and time. And it's beyond the limitations of space and time and beyond the limitations of what we call the speed of light. And today, until today, the scientists don't have an understanding of how can this happen. So these are kind of some enigma, which is called weirdness, actually, in ultimate study of physics. There are many other factors, like going across barriers and finding an atom or a particle on the other side, which normally it cannot at all pass. There are many, many other factors that have shown that ultimate reality from the physics perspective is much different than was assumed or thought about in classical reality. And the connection to interaction and consciousness started to be experienced, and many of the large scientists, most important big finders of great research and scientific investigation in physics, have declared that the world, the universe, is more like a thought than a physical entity, physical reality. And that is because the unified field is truly a mathematical construct that is beyond just physical matter. And matter is not just localized, it also has at its basis fields, and those fields are unbounded. And that is how we can say that there is one ultimate reality, which is an ocean of being. And now it's the question of finding what is this ocean of being? What is that ocean of reality? Is it physical? Where does it come from? Is it material? But then how does it emerge, from where it comes from? And these are big questions today, of course, in science as well as philosophy. And that is what brings us to the other approach of the ancient rishis and scientists of reality from introspective perspective. So we put this to the side, having found that ultimate reality from a physical perspective is a unified field that has something to do with consciousness, that is having characteristics that are not on the gross level understandable, on the classical level, that they have rules and laws and ways of interacting that are different than what we experience on the surface level of reality. So let's put this one to the side a little bit and go to the experience in terms of consciousness, in terms of awareness. Experience in terms of consciousness is primary, because first we say that without consciousness, we don't have anything. Why? Because for us as humans, at least, if we are not conscious, then what does it matter? What does anything matter? We don't know anything, we don't experience anything, we don't know love, we don't know knowledge, we don't have understanding of the universe, we don't have understanding of ourselves, We don't have feelings, we don't experience anything. So if somebody is in deep sleep, or even worse than that, in coma, let's say, then what does it matter for them to be the wealthiest person in the world, or the most loved person of the world, or having been at some time the most knowledgeable person in the world? It means nothing to them. Life actually means nothing if there is no consciousness, if there is no awareness. If we're not aware, there is no meaning, there is no understanding, there is no value in anything. Another question comes, what is consciousness? And we know we have three general levels of consciousness. We have deep sleep, and these are normal states of consciousness. We have deep sleep, we have dream state, and we have waking state of consciousness. These are the usual normal states of consciousness. And each of these states of consciousness has a specific physiological reality in it. In deep sleep, you are very rested, the body is rested, but you don't have consciousness. You have certain electrical activities in the brain. As we know, neuroscience studies this very, very well. You know, the brain slows down gradually through the different stages of sleep, and then it goes into deep sleep, and then there is dreaming can start, rapid eye movements, sleep, it has a different frequency, and there on the subjective level you have certain experiences. And then in the waking state you go to the higher frequencies of electrical activity, and you are awake, but the physiology and metabolism are very active. So these are the three major states of normal, usual consciousness. What we have found is that when people practice transcendental meditation, for example, which is one of the techniques that comes from the Vedic tradition, as taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the mind settles down. And here we say in this technique that the mind is like an ocean. Consciousness is like an ocean, and it can be active on its surface and calmer as we go deep inside. And as you go deeper towards the inner experience, diving into one's own consciousness, the mind settles down and goes beyond the thought level. So you go beyond the thinking level on the surface level to being aware and conscious on a very deep level, where you don't even have any thoughts or any activity or any feeling. That's what we call transcending, going beyond the surface level to a very profound, deep level of cognition, of consciousness. When you experience that, you are awake, you are not asleep, and yet your metabolism is very, very low, very calm. So that's why we call it a hypometabolic alert state. So hypometabolic, highly alert state. So the mind is very clear, very sharp, but the body is completely rested. And the mind is experiencing that state of what we call pure consciousness, which means consciousness aware of itself alone, and not even aware of any thought or any specific feeling or any specific idea. So you go to this, what we call samadhi in the Vedic tradition, that state of stillness of the mind, yet completely awake, not asleep, because you can say, okay, if you don't have any thoughts, maybe you are deeply sleeping, and that's not the case. In this case, we are saying, you are diving deep into the self and then reaching that state of samadhi, where we reach that true inner self that the rishis have experienced from India. And so therefore, what we have here is the ability to reach a state of infinite silence, infinite calm, yet fully awake and fully alert. This is what we call the state of pure consciousness, pure awareness. And so Now that we go to the Rishi side of investigation of ultimate reality, and that is what the Rishis have said, and that is that if you dive deep into yourself, you reach that state which is beyond the mind, because the mind is a thinking process, beyond the intellect, which is a discriminating process, so beyond manas, beyond buddhi, and even beyond ahamkar, the sense of ego on a personal level. And they gave it the name of Atma, or pure being, pure consciousness. That is which the self that is beyond even the ego, the intellect, the mind, and the bhutas, and all the prakritis. So you transcend. That's what transcending means. That is transcendental meditation. And you reach that state of total transcendence, being established, as it says, in the self, and as described in the Vedic literature, in different aspects of yoga. That is the state of yoga, of unity, of oneness of everything. So, as it says, yogastha, established in being, then perform action from that perspective. And what happens is tremendous things, as we have done scientifically and research through hundreds of scientific research studies, that all of the outer aspects actually improve when you are balancing this inner reality. When you go to that space or place, which is not a space or not a place, because it is unbounded. And that's why I call this book One Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness. You reach that whole ocean where you are the entire ocean, not just the waves on the surface. And that is what the rishis have explained. Now, that means ultimate subjectivity, which means the ultimate experience on the subjective level, takes us also to a unified field of consciousness. And therefore, ultimate objectivity from the perspective of modern science and ultimate subjectivity, they actually come truly to the same point, to the same value, to the same reality. That there is one field, that there is one reality that is underlying all that is on the surface. And now the question comes, what is that reality? Is it physical or is it consciousness? And here you come to philosophy, and you have different, of course, schools of thought. Before I get to that, I must just emphasize that when you experience that consciousness through transcending, you actually transform in a most positive way the way you think, the way you experience, the way you behave, and the way your body works. We have seen that when you transcend, there is great coherence in the nervous system. Front and back, right and left, they start working together in a coherent way. So there is a full use of the higher parts of the nervous system, higher parts of the brain is completely balanced and activated in a coherent way. We have seen health improve dramatically. People feel that they are more creative. They have less hospital admissions. The immune system is strengthened. And hundreds and hundreds of scientific research studies published in peer-reviewed journals have shown that the experience of the transcendent changes the values on the outer expression, not only of the individual, but what is very interesting is that they change also the social behavior. When a small group of people practice these techniques of transcendental meditation, then that effect is not limited to the individual, but we have seen reduction in accidents of the road, reduction in crime, reduction in hospital admission, reduction in infant mortality. And these are indications of a transformation in society even from the transcendence of a few people that actually entrain and adjust the functioning on the collective awareness of society. So what this tells us from an objective perspective, we have a unified field which has something to do with consciousness. From the subjective level, we find that consciousness is absolutely primary, and when it is deep and is experienced on the deepest level, it can actually change the individual life on a physical level, what appears as a physical on the surface, and also on the collective level in society. So these are already very powerful converging points that lead us to start thinking about ultimate reality. Now, if you come to the philosophical point of view, you can say there is consciousness, which is a very personal, subjective experience, as we have said, and there is matter or material level or physical levels. And scientists are divided and philosophers are divided into different schools of thought. There are the dualists who believe that there are two realities. One is physical, one is mental or consciousness, and they are two different ones. And there are the monists, which say, no, there is only one entity. And in this monist category, you have those who say that it's actually the physical that is all that there is, which means there is some energy, some field. Now we know it's fields. And these fields appear as many, they appear as particles. Particles get complexified, they come together, they form complex structures, such as ultimately a human nervous system. And then the human nervous system is creating consciousness. As if consciousness emerges, it's an emergent quality from the physical reality. But over the past 25 years, top scientists, top thinkers, top philosophers have tried in every possible way to explain how physical reality can lead to consciousness, which is very subjective, very personal. And I can tell you, they don't even have a clue. There is not even one clue of a possibility of how the physical, the material, actually leads to the experience on the consciousness level, to the experience on the personal level, on the subjective level, such as the experience of love, the experience of even, joy and pain and happiness and knowledge and experience of personal experience, even how you experience a color of an object as personal, like the redness of the red, and it gives you some experience, what they call qualia in terms of philosophical discussions. And there is no clue how this can happen. On the other hand, we have the monists, the idealists they usually called, who believe and have said that actually it's consciousness that is primary, and from consciousness emerges all the other realities. Now, in this reality also we have a challenge, and the challenge is how something that is consciousness appears as material, as physical on the surface level. We cannot reject the fact that we have a body, we live in the physical reality, and therefore we have to explain how consciousness, if it is primary, can lead to the physical manifestations. Now, the greatest idealist, if you like, or monist that has brought this to light in the most profound and complete way, I would say, is Adi Shankara, who has developed the Advaita Vedanta, where Advaita means non-divided, non-dual, reality of oneness of everything, so that everything is actually consciousness. Now, when you ask how does it explain the appearance of physical reality, usually it's the idea of Maya that is evoked. Idea of Maya means it's an illusion. We live kind of in an illusionary state. Now, the interpretation of what the illusion is very different. And I have, of course, based on Maharishi's teaching and my research and understanding, a specific interpretation of how this consciousness appears as matter. But basically, what we are proposing, based on all the logic, again, now we come to findings, experience, personal experience, transcending the subjective level, the objective analysis, and now we have to come to logic and ask ourselves how we can resolve these different issues. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi had a vision that Vedas are actually fluctuations of the laws of nature, that they are fluctuations of consciousness, that Vedas are not a philosophical creation, they are not an intellectual creation, they are direct fluctuations of the field of consciousness. In the same way as we have seen in the objective perspective that the fluctuations of the unified field lead to elementary particles and forces that interact together and then that group themselves to appear as outer universe. In the Vedic understanding, as brought to light by Maharishi, consciousness is primary. So the unified field that we talked about is a field of consciousness, not a material field, not a physical field. It's a field of pure being, pure consciousness, but it fluctuates within itself and leads to appearance of different dynamics, but the vibrations of these dynamics are what we call the Veda. So the Vedas are cognitions by the rishis within themselves of actually how the laws of nature fluctuate, and the Vedas are a sound representation on a sound level because we chant the Veda, we hear the Veda, but it's on the vibrational level, not on the meaning level primarily. Of course, the meaning has also a significance, but primarily on the sound level, the Vedas fluctuate and interact in a way that they create actually the entire universe. This brings us to a very interesting topic here, and that is our human body, our human physiology as humans allows us to experience transcendence. So allows us to experience the unified field. If our theory that unified field is equal to transcendence, it's equal to Atma, it's equal to pure consciousness. And our body, our nervous system, our actual structure allows us to experience that transcendence. And if you look at all the great traditions, starting from Veda, Aham Brahmasmi, I am totality, Vedoham, I am the Veda, and Sarvam Kalvidam Brahm, everything is that reality. And if you look at the traditions, even in the Bible, where say humans were created in the image of God, or the kingdom of heaven is within you, all of this indicates that the humans have a construct in them that allows them to experience the highest values of transcendence. And therefore, the logic must say that we are an embodiment of the totality of nature. So if Veda is totality of nature because it is the fluctuations of the unified field, and humans are also having in a physical form the totality of the laws of nature in their physical form, these two must correspond to each other. And so Maharishi has asked me to find if this is correct and how it can be, because I'm neuroscientist and brain researchers and physiology and all of that. And I have studied the Veda with him and the structure of the Vedic literature and how it manifests itself. And then I looked at that and I found a one-to-one correlation between the structure and function of the Vedic literature as organized by Maharishi and brought to light by him as being the same as the structure and function of our body, which means the different parts of the brain, different parts of the nervous system, let's say the thalamus sitting in the middle between the outer and the inner, between the specific values and the cortex, which puts things together to make them holy, which is described in Nyaya, we can say, as the light at the door, which lights the inside and the outside, have the same structure. Nyaya has 5 chapters, and the thalamus have 5 divisions divided in a very clear way. Nyaya in the first sutras explains pramana prameya, the 16 values of acquiring knowledge or getting into knowledge and like that. And the thalamus has 16 nuclei that correspond one-to-one to the 16 aspects of Nyaya. And this is only one example. Yoga, for example, has 4 chapters, the Yoga book of Patanjali, and it's the unifying value. And the unifying value in our brain is those association fibers that connect right and left, front and back, and interconnect all the different parts of the brain, which is like if you have different processors in the brain and they talk to each other, that's how they are unified, and they're unified through these association fibers. So yoga must be part of this association fiber system that is in the brain. And when you look at the brain, we know it is made out of 4 lobes, and the yoga book has 4 chapters. And each of these chapters has a number of sutras. And these sutras correspond to the different parts of the brain activities that interconnect with each other in a specific way. So these are 2 different examples about the actual correlation between Veda and the human physiology. And there are many like that. There are 40 different aspects that are detailed in one of the books that I have written. It's called Human Physiology Expression of Veda and Vedic Literature, that takes us on not only to the brain and the physiology of the nervous system, but also to the cells and even the DNA, and show how all of these things are so profoundly similar and connected together, showing that actually the fluctuations of consciousness, which is the experiences of the rishis in the Veda, are a blueprint of the structure and function of the human nervous system. So this is one more additional correlation. Another, and there are many, is to explain how consciousness actually fluctuates. And this is beautifully explained by the fact that consciousness is conscious, and therefore it is aware. And whenever you are conscious, you have 3 values. You have the observer, the process of observation, and the observed. And these 3 values are necessary, because when you say, I am conscious, you ask, you are conscious of what? So there is always an observer that is conscious. We can call this the rishi, the observer. And there is an object that is being experienced, but there is also a connection between the object and the subject. And this is the connecting value. We like to call it the Devata value, because in Rig Veda there are always these 3 values, Rishi, Devata, Chandas, that determine the structure of Rig Veda. And Rishi is the knower, Devata is the process of knowing, and Chandas is the actual meter, but it means the collapse into a specific physical or outer level of experience. So the three levels come together to create an experience, and it is through this that the dynamics of consciousness emerge. Now, the time doesn't allow, and I'm now starting to try to feel that I have to soon close and open the door for questions, but all of this is really described in great detail with logics from mathematics, logics from modern science, logic from ancient science, to come to a conclusion of ultimately that consciousness is all there is. That consciousness, the Advaita Vedanta, is the true ultimate reality. And then how does this emerge? It's through the fluctuations and the dynamics of observer-observed, process of observation that interact together to form the reality of all that there is. And therefore, here consciousness expands itself from just being a human-like consciousness to being everything that there is, which means everything is a conscious entity. Whatever you see, whatever you experience, whatever we have in the universe is a conscious entity, but on a range from wide consciousness, enlightened consciousness, very broad consciousness that knows itself to be totality, aham brahmasmi, to very low level of consciousness. So animals have lower levels of consciousness than humans. Plants have lower level of consciousness than animals. Even a stone or a particle, it has a tiny, meager, small level of consciousness also. Which means when a particle, for example, detects the gravitational field and responds to gravity, we are saying this is a small, tiny level of detecting something or experiencing something, and that is a conscious experience. So what is important is to realize that not all consciousness are human-like consciousness. Because if you say everything is consciousness, people will start thinking it is human-like consciousness. And then they tell you, what do you mean? Do you mean the tree has a sense of self, has a sense of being, is thinking about the future, it can understand the laws of nature like we do as humans? No, it doesn't. There is a range of consciousness. Even for us humans, we have sleep, we have dream, we have waking, we have enlightened state, we have samadhi, we have unity consciousness. All of these, even for a human being, are different layers and levels of consciousness. And they have their specific transformations and changes in the physiology, in the brain, and how it works, which parts are activated. Lower than that, can be lower consciousness. For example, when we say the subconscious, even in human being, I don't like to call it subconscious. It is probably subconscious, but not unconscious. Because even your cells are conscious. They are actually acting from a very, very specific level, limited level, but together they create the holistic consciousness that we have as humans. Every organ of our body is a conscious organ because it detects, it feels, it interacts. Now, you can say, does the liver have the same consciousness as the nervous system? Or does it have the same consciousness of the entire body? I say no, of course. It has its own levels. But all of these levels added up together is what makes our human consciousness. And therefore, when we understand that, if a stone falls with respect to gravity, and we can say it is conscious of gravity, but its consciousness doesn't mean it is going to ask itself, oh, am I going to fall? Am I going to break myself? Am I going to feel anything? Will I be hurting? It will not feel anything like humans feel. It will not sense anything like maybe humans sense, but it senses the very basic gravitational field And I'm calling this a conscious experience. Okay, so I want to wrap it up by saying, why does this all happen? Why the unbounded ocean of consciousness, which is pure being, pure wholeness, manifests as different states of consciousness, as different limited values of consciousness. And it will be all explained here in this book, which is coming in August. It's called Consciousness is All There Is. It is going to be actually in English, and it will be released even in India in August of this coming summer, in 4 months, 3-4 months. And it has all these discussions and explanations, and also the technologies of how to use consciousness to make life better for everyone, how to use consciousness to resolve the problems of artificial intelligence, which can be a threat if humans don't raise their consciousness, the problems of the environment, the problems of poverty, the problems of conflict and war between people, the problems of genetic engineering. All of these can be solved from the field, which is the ultimate reality, which is the field of consciousness. Why consciousness has manifested? I'll say it in brief, but it's described in great detail in the book. Basically, it goes, consciousness knows itself from an unbounded, unlimited perspective, and through manifestation, through the field of manifest universe, it knows itself from limited perspectives. So it's all about knowledge, knowing yourself. Why? Because consciousness is to be conscious. That's why we call it consciousness. And it is to know itself. Know thyself, know yourself to be unbounded, pure being, but also you know that you can know yourself from limited perspectives. And that is the field of manifestation, or what some call creation. That's the field in which consciousness knows itself from limited perspectives. So there are many convergent logics, convergent experiments, convergent findings from modern science going into ultimate objectivity, from ancient Vedic science going into ultimate subjectivity, from logic, from also explaining phenomena in science, explaining phenomena in life, about freedom, about determinism, about the meaning of things, that actually come together to say that consciousness is all there is, and that it's all a field of consciousness in which we are moving. And it is from that field that we can solve the problems, that we can understand the meaning of life, and that we can really create a universe or a world that is working for everyone, that is fulfilling for everyone, in which unity is available in the diversity of its expressions. So unity in diversity, and we are all that. And that is why if we know our true self truly, we can say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, is that the world is my family. Actually, the world is myself. Creation, the whole universe, is my true inner self, appearing as many, many factors. So India really, Bharat, to lead the world in knowledge and in solving the problems from its powerful knowledge of reality that has been unfolded by the rishis, by the Vedic tradition, not only as a theory, but also as practical technologies to make a difference, such as transcendental meditation and the advanced programs, the siddhis, have brought to light by Maharishi Patanjali in the ancient time and revived in this time by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So thank you for being with me. I didn't show slides. It would have taken us longer, but I know that you have powerful understanding and imagination, and that just by talking, we can imagine all these different parts of reality and talk about them. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Tony Nader, for this wonderful talk. It was a mind-boggling concept, and I think we need to give a lot of we need to give a lot of thought and reading to your deliberation. Thank you very much for that. And of course, it is very different from our conventional learning of science as taught by Plum and Postner and others. So this is a confluence of Vedic science and the present day modern science. So I think it was really a very interesting talk. And there are some questions, if you can check yourself from the question answer box, or
Shall
if you wish.
Shall I read them out? There are 4 or 5.
Yeah, please,
yeah.
it's better. It's better. You select them and I will
Yes.
happy to answer.
And I can also request the other participants to post their questions quickly if they have any, because we don't have much time. But going to the first question by Professor Partha Ray, he says that you mentioned that particles tend to align when they are being watched or observed. Does this mean that particles have life or reactivity? You mentioned that when we have an electron here, there's a twin of it in Mars. Please explain this concept. I think he is talking about the concept in the quantum this thing of maintaining the spin at a distance. So, please, Dr. Nader.
Yeah, this is there are 2 values. There is the entanglement, which means the spin value, 2 particles that travel in space, they remain correlated, infinitely correlated. And at a speed, is faster than the speed of light, which is an immediate change. That is called entanglement. And that is because there is, from the explanation of consciousness, there is infinite correlation in the entire universe. Everything is connected to everything else. And there is no explanation from the physicalist point of view. So this is one point. The other point is about what we call the collapse of the wave function. Particles are non-local when they are at a small level. That is something we cannot imagine in a classical universe. But when you go deeper, this is exactly what scientists found, that particles have a wave function, which means have a probability of being in different places. And when you observe them, they collapse in one place. And that is a big enigma in science today, in physics. It has been explained by the Copenhagen interpretation as due to the interaction of consciousness with the object, which precipitates the object into a localized reality. And I have an explanation for that, and that is based on the interaction between object, subject, and process of observation. And that is, a way of observing things. So that is how it works.
Thank you, Professor Nader. There is Dr. Shah. Do you have any question?
No, so I think in one liner, if I summarize what he wants to tell, that to exist is to be observed as an object by a subject through a process. And objects exist only for the subjects observing them. Am I right, Dr. Nader?
Yeah, exactly. I wrote this also in an article in the International Journal of Mathematics and Consciousness. It's exactly that.
Yeah, okay.
There is one more question on, the difference between the medical definition of consciousness and this vaster or broader definition of the field of consciousness. So could you please say a few words about that?
Yeah, this is very important because medical definition of consciousness is based on human consciousness. Like we are humans, and therefore we have sleep, dream, waking, and we have what we call the subconscious or the unconscious, which is also known to exist, to be real. And it's from a human perspective. What I am proposing is that consciousness is much more than that. Consciousness is also any sensing, any detecting, any feeling, any reacting and interacting. And therefore, we put consciousness on a broad range, which is beyond just human awareness in the states of consciousness. And, which, as I said, even a stone falling, I am calling it's detecting the field of gravity, and I'm calling this a meager, minor level of consciousness. Again, we shouldn't confuse this with human consciousness, because this is where people will start arguing, oh, what do you mean that the plant is conscious? You think the plant or the tree is thinking about itself and feeling and suffering, and maybe it does, but I'm not supposing necessarily that it does. But the fact that the plant senses, for example, the humidity in the ground, and it sends its roots to get the water, to get the nutrients. It senses the sun, the flowers react to the sun. They turn towards the sun, some of them this way, some of them that way. That sensing is also a conscious aspect, again, on a minimal level. The plant doesn't say, oh, there is humidity there, and what is humidity is water, and I need water today, so let me go and get it. It doesn't have that sensing, that logic, that kind of experience or analysis that humans have. But it just senses, and the fact of sensing is an act of consciousness, a minimal consciousness.
Yes, that's nice, sir. Thank you. There is one more question which brings us to the point of the continuity of the self. That is, how is it that we forget everything in sleep and regain all of that when we wake up? That's the question.
Yeah, the continuity of the self is there, and as we go through different phases of consciousness, we are still, the body is there, the sense of self is there and is experienced in different modes. When we say we are asleep and we have no consciousness, I'm saying it's not correct, because no consciousness means non-existence. For me, consciousness is necessary or is equivalent to existence in many ways. Of course, there are different meanings and different angles to look at it, but without consciousness, there is no existence. So during sleep, we have a different kind of consciousness. Our cells are still interacting, our body is still functioning, it's still maintaining its homeostasis. If there is a sound that comes, maybe we wake up, and therefore the sensing of the sound is there. Even when we are sleeping, we don't maybe hear it in the same way as the waking state. But the state of deep sleep even is a state of consciousness. It's not a state of non-existence, non-consciousness, but it's a consciousness in a different mode, in a different way, in which the cells are conscious, in which the organs are conscious, but in a limited way. And the higher levels of consciousness, of course, the nervous system is working in a different way. Also, it's correcting itself, it's cleaning up its byproducts that it has accumulated. But all of these are aspects of consciousness, and they are still there. So when we move to a new state of consciousness, we are awake, and there we have the sense of self from the awake perspective. When we are dreaming, we have the sense of self from a dream perspective, in which maybe fantasy comes, and lions and tigers can come and travel and flying in the air. It's also the self. We know it's the self. We experience it as ourself, but it's in a fantasy way. So the self remains, and the ultimate self is always that Atma, that infinite value, which is experienced from different perspectives in different states of consciousness.
May I ask one question, Dr. Vasudevan, if you permit, please?
Yes, please, sir. Go ahead.
Dr. Nader, your theory explains to some extent or quite well the matter part of the consciousness, but what about space and time? As you mentioned that everything is consciousness, consciousness is all there is. So how do you explain space and time, which are important components of, you know,
Physical reality.
different, yeah, so whether these are the realities and whether they're, what it has to do with consciousness. Energy, you have explained, I understand that. But these parts, space and time, how do you take into consciousness account?
Space and time are concepts in consciousness. They are concepts that allow separation between different limited aspects of consciousness. So what does it mean? It means there is the unbounded ocean of consciousness, the one unbounded pure being, the Atma, the self, the wholeness. And there are the waves of consciousness. So you have the ocean and you have the waves. Now, when you look at the waves, in order to see the waves as separate, there is a concept in consciousness of space, for example. That concept allows you to see limited values as separate one from the other. And therefore, space is a concept of separation that allows us to see limited perspectives on their own level as being independent one from the other. Time allows us to see the transformation of those limited values in the process of change. So when I am one and I continue to be the same, yet I am changing, that change is a gap in it that is as a concept of consciousness called time. So when you want to see many things at the same time, you need space. When you want to see the same thing transforming, you need time. So time and space are concepts in consciousness that allows us to see things in a limited perspective. Without time and space, there is no manifestation because everything merges. You know, if there is no space, everything is merging. Everything is in one space, which means everything is one on top of the other. So there is no difference. So in the absolute field of life, there is no space and time. And for Brahman, for totality, for wholeness, there is no space and time. Everything is now and everything is here. For the perspective, in a limited perspective in manifestation, you need space to separate individual entities, and you need time to see those entities evolve from one state to another.
So in other words, you are saying that space and time are subsumed under consciousness, which is fundamental.
Exactly.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
There was one more question which was asking about, is non-duality a state of the mind? I presume that's an easy one even for me to answer. I would say no, it's not a state of the mind. It is much beyond the mind. Am I right?
Exactly. Mind is a field of where duality can appear. But beyond the mind is non-duality. That is the transcendental state of pure being.
So there is one more question from Dr. R.V. Anand. They asked whether consciousness pertains to all living beings only or non-living things also. This is exactly what you were saying a few minutes ago. I think that is more like panpsychism, where they say everything is conscious, even rocks, as you were saying, have a glimmer of consciousness. So your answer, please, sir.
Yes, I think the answer is in the question. Yeah,
Yes.
It's not just panpsychism. Panpsychism can be dualist, which means It can assume
Yeah,
that there
I
are
get you.
objects and the objects have consciousness and every object has consciousness. What I'm saying is that really consciousness is all there is. Consciousness is all there is. There is one thing only, and that is consciousness. And that consciousness appears as many.
In fact, sir, this,
So it's a unified field.
yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
So you want to say it is a unified field, and it's all what we are seeing is different aspects, but consciousness is all there. It's a single field.
Right, exactly. One ocean, imagine one ocean, because my first book was One Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness,
Correct.
which was to describe that idea. There is an ocean, and this ocean has waves. So you look at the
Sure.
wave, and if you don't see except one wave, and you separate that wave from the other wave because you create space between them in your mind, then you can say the waves are different. But in reality, everything is one ocean. But the ocean has waves. And you can focus on the wave and say, well, there are different realities. You and I are different, obviously, as a wave. But you and I are the same as consciousness goes, as the unified field goes.
Yes, sir. So this same point, I think, has been brought out in Tononi's integrated information theory, which I was talking about earlier. They also claim that as the complexity of a structure increases, the manifestation of consciousness increases. So even a table or a chair can have some degree of consciousness, and probably even the vast astronomical levels, even the universe itself, or the galaxies and the planetary systems are conscious. Now, how does this appear to you in terms of your take on consciousness? Now, is it agreeable to you, or do you think it is different from what you are saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've been saying this. I mean, with Maharishi, I wrote my book, first book on Veda and physiology. And in it, I say very clearly, consciousness is all there is, that physiology is consciousness, that matter is intelligence. This was already in 1994, 93. And so later on, came this cosmology kind of thinking and cosmic consciousness or like that. But the Veda has been talking about it, Advaita Vedanta has been saying it since Shankara and before. So it's not my invention and it's not their kind of necessarily invention. It's just speculating. And all of these come together. Yes, absolutely. The question is, the contribution that we have is, how is it that consciousness appears as these different things? Where is the gap in between surface matter, physical, which we don't want to say doesn't exist? It's very real. But how is it? It is real in terms of consciousness, different dynamics of consciousness. And so that is how I explain how consciousness appears as matter.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Shah, we have passed
Yeah,
7:30, we wind up?
Yeah, before that, if you allow, I want to say,
Yes, yes.
according to Vedas or even your expanded theory or what Mahesh told, what do you think? What is the origin of consciousness? When did consciousness emerge? From where did it emerge? And how did it spread? Is there any theory for that, or it was like you can't explain? It was there ever, and I mean, there is no explanation.
There is absolutely an explanation, which is part of what actually is the logic about consciousness. See, consciousness is beyond space and time and beyond matter. It's not something material, and therefore the question does not arise. It's a different paradigm, a different frame of thinking. When we think about beginning and end, we are thinking of localized objects in space and time. When does this appear in time? Where is it in space? These are questions that are relevant only in the physical, material aspects of reality. Consciousness is actually nothingness in terms of material reality. It is fullness, it is wholeness, it is completeness in terms of its own entity as consciousness. And therefore, it is itself beyond time and space. So there is no concept of start and end. It's all permeating. And that is how you transcend the question. This is the only way to answer this question.
That is what I was saying. It is Anadi Anant as per the Vedas and our Advait, etc. So it is Anadi. It has been there since ever, and it is Anand. It will be till everything. So I think that's the only way we can explain it. I understand what you say.
Right.
Dr. Vasudevan, is there any question that sir wants to take?
Would you do you have time, sir, for any question?
Yes, I'm very happy to be with you.
Yeah,
Yes.
there was one question from Dr. Suresh Kumar. He would like to know the explanation of thalamic chronotaxis from your perspective. It is an entity that's more talked about but not understood. And
Thalamic what?
Chronotaxis.
The time.
To do with time, yes, perception of time. And there is one more question. We can club it together. If consciousness is unified, why are we humans heterogeneous in the sleep architecture?
Well, there is a whole chronobiology, and that is the rhythms of life and nature. And that is the part of the fluctuations of consciousness. It all happens in a vibrational way. And there are cycles. So there are small cycles that are microseconds, and then there are bigger cycles, and there are larger cycles, day and night, and then years and yugas and all of that. And all of this we are subjected to. And there is within us those cycles that are in connection with the cycles of nature, waking, sleeping, dreaming. That's why, we have sleep that comes after a certain period of waking that is required to clean up and clear up the system. And so all of these cells and chronobiology are ingrained in our human structure, and they have different components in the nervous system that correspond to them. And these components are all dynamics of consciousness from my perspective anyway. And so they are expressions of the flow and dynamics of consciousness.
So ultimately, everything, as you said, is subsumed under consciousness, even the movement of time.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
And for our audience, sir, would you please elaborate on the last question, and that is, how is the relation between Brahma and consciousness? So, as per the Vedic perspective, consciousness and Brahman, what is the link?
Brahman is total consciousness. There is consciousness as an ocean, and there is two aspects of this consciousness. There is personal, we can say, and impersonal consciousness. So the ultimate transcendental consciousness is impersonal. It is always equal to itself. It is always infinite, unbounded. It never changes. And it is all existing, pure existence, pure being. But when this consciousness becomes conscious of itself, in a sense, it folds on itself, it reflects on itself, and it sees within itself all possibilities of being conscious, meaning infinite possibilities of ways of being conscious. Some of the ways of being conscious is Dr. Shah's style of being conscious. Some of the ways is Dr. Devanathan's style of being conscious. Some of its ways is my conscious. Some of its ways are the elephant's way of being conscious. And some of its ways is the sun's ways of being conscious. So all of these possibilities are part of the personal ways of being conscious. So there is the impersonal, absolute, flat, absolute, pure being, unbounded, silent, uninvolved. And there is then the being conscious, so it's conscious of its all possibilities. And Brahman is, we can say, that field that knows the infinite, unbounded field of pure consciousness, but also knows at the same time all the specific fields of being conscious. It knows the sun, the moon, it knows how I am conscious, how you are conscious, and it is experiencing all of that through us, actually, in a sense, but we are itself. So Brahman is totality, is that wholeness of specific and holistic, and that is the difference.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
So, Dr. Vasudevan, we can wind up for the audience, and if we can have a small dialogue thereafter. But as far as audience is concerned, that I think you've taken most of the questions, and
Yes.
Dr. Nader has answered many of them. So, shall we wind up for the audience, please?
Yes, yes. In fact,
Dr.
yeah.
Nader, please stay back for a couple of minutes, as I had mentioned earlier.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so I thank you, Dr. Nader, for a brilliant talk, as usual. There's nothing surprising about that. And I thank all the members of the audience who have been present with us today, the neurologists, the other doctors, other scientists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Nader,
Yes.
as I believe people are exiting. Yeah, yes, most of them. I wanted to remind you of one verse from Sangeet Bhaskar. This is a text written by Sarang Dev in 13th century. Sarang Dev